Hi guys, so here's part 2 of our lecture, and this is going to talk about cell types. As you can see here, there are a lot of really interesting pictures of cells, and what's going to be exceedingly exciting is this next week we're going to actually be able to come in and look at those cells. And so as you remember, the cell theory incorporates the three following ideas: that all living things are composed of one or more cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life, and new cells only come from pre-existing cells. Essentially, that's cell division. And we're going to talk about that when we get to mitosis and meiosis. Now, there are two major categories of cells. We have essentially what's called prokaryote, and that comes from pro and the Latin words karyo, which essentially mean before and nucleus. So this is going to be before cells had a nucleus. Eukaryote comes from U and KO, which means true and nucleus. So these are things that actually have a nucleus. And if you remember anything about biology, it means that they're going to have that compartment that you store DNA in, and essentially this is the control center of a cell. So when we talk about prokaryotic cells, we're looking at bacteria and archaea are the two main domains that you get in here. And essentially that is going to be the bacteria that you are more commonly associated with, like E. coli, where archaea bacteria tend to be bacteria that are ancient bacteria. And then again, we have protists, plants, fungi, and animals here in the eukaryotes. And protists, you can think of things like paramecium, and of course plant, fungi, and animals we are more commonly able to identify. So you can look here comparing prokaryotes and eukaryotes, essentially. Cytoplasm is going to be in the entire interior cell region for prokaryotes. And this is going to be around the regions of the nucleus, right between the nucleus and the plasma membrane. Now, cytoplasm is made of essentially cytosol, and that's just the liquid component. Cytoplasm is going to be the liquid, which is cytosol, plus all the other junk you find in it. Okay? Now, prokaryotes tend to have singular circular DNA, and they're what's known as nucleoid region. They do not have an actual nucleus, where if you look in eukaryotic cells, they have one or more linear chromosomes, and that's the chromatin 2 that you find inside the center nucleus. Both have ribosomes, but they are structurally different slightly. These are known to evolve what they believe about 3.5 billion years ago in prokaryotes, and they come before the eukaryotic cells. And we're going to talk about the endosymbiotic theory of cell formation a little bit later. These tend to be prokaryotes smaller and just simpler in nature, and essentially eukaryotes are going to be more complex. There's no membrane-bound organelles in prokaryotes, which we know there are in eukaryotes, things like the nucleus or the rough endoplasmic reticulum or the mitochondria. And these guys can be surrounded by cell walls. They can have capsule, pili, and flagella. And only plants have cell walls. Animals are surrounded by extracellular matrix, and they only have a plasma membrane. So, when we look at cells, essentially, you can say they are both bound by plasma membranes. So, essentially, what we have here, that they have that cell membrane, doesn't matter what they are, they do have this basically cell membrane or plasma membrane. They both have this cytosol, that really thick jelly. And when they have cellular components within it, that's what's known as the cytoplasm. They all have DNA. And their chromosomes are just kind of put together slightly different. And all cells have ribosomes, and these are tiny structures. So, and they help to build proteins. Now, like I said, prokaryotic cells are older. They essentially feel like there was a cell. The endosymbiotic theory says that there's a cell that I always like to say that there are two cells sitting at a bar drinking. And they're both basically talking about how they had busy days, right? And one of them talks to the other and says, you know what? I really just like making energy. That's all I really want to do. All this other stuff, geez, like making proteins and shipping stuff around in vesicles and destroying stuff, it's just not for me. All I want to do is make energy, make ATP. That's my goal in life. And the other cell says, you know what? I'm feeling a little tired doing all these functions as well. Why don't you just come inside me and sit down, and essentially you can work inside me and make energy all day. And I'll do everything else. Thus, where we get mitochondria from. So that's kind of how they believe that happened. And so it makes sense that prokaryotes came around a billion or so years before eukaryotic cells did. Like I said, prokaryotic cells are usually smaller than eukaryotic cells, and they are much more simplistic. And so essentially, when we talk about prokaryotes, like I said, they're going to be bacteria and archaea, and then eukaryotic cells are going to be protists, plants, fungi, and animal. So let's first look at prokaryotic cells. As you can see in this, you don't see any kind of organelles inside, no kind of structure here, right? There's no nucleus. This area that you see right here is a nucleoid region. And I like to think if you know the word void, which means no in the sense of the word, right? It doesn't have it. If you have a contract that's void and null, basically you're getting rid of it. So on here, it kind of sounds like me, a combination of nucleus plus void, which equals nucleoid. So I think no nucleus, right? No nucleus right here. They do have a cell wall on the outside. Underneath it is the cell membrane, right? They have little ribosomes throughout. And a lot of times they have a little flagella on the end to help them with locomotion. So that's kind of giving you, and that's the electron microscope picture that I told you that you could see. Now there's two main categories here. Bacteria, they're small. The size of both of these are roughly the same, between 1 micromolar, micrometer and 10 micrometers in diameter. These bacteria in general are very, very abundant in the environment and our bodies. There are actually more prokaryotic or bacterial cells in our body than we actually have human cells. Vast majority of those are not harmful. There are some species that can cause disease. Now the archaea, these are more ancient bacteria. You find these in extreme environments. So when you're talking about things like the hot spring that's so hot that it'll melt your skin off, or things that have extremely high concentrations of salt that most living things cannot live in, these are where you're going to find these. Halobacterium is an example of one, and these are less common. Now bacteria have very specific shape, and so the most common are these three that you see here, right? And it's essentially the bacillus here, which means there's a rod shape. So something like this, E. coli, actually has this shape. Coccus, or cocci, is for circle. And essentially on here, a lot of times you'll see that name in the thing. So Staphylococcus aureus is another example of this, and it's something that, if you see, it's a staff in the front of it. And then you have here, which is spirillum, and spirillum is for spiral. Now, you can have, and even Vibrio is pretty common on this, and you can think of cholera, and that Vibrio cholera, it gets its name for its shape. Now, these guys can have different arrangements. So these over here are the shapes. These are the arrangements. And so you can see they can be in chains here where they're in a long line. They can be clustered together. They can be in pairs here. So these are all showing the circle, and this is just showing bacilli that's in a chain. So they have specific shapes and arrangements. Now let's look at some of these that you find inside the plasma membrane, just to kind of reiterate, and then we're going to get a little bit more specific in some of the outside of the plasma membrane. So if you look here, and this again, remember how I said TEM, this is a transmission electron microscope, and the color is due to they've actually colorified this. So if you look in the middle here, you're going to see that nucleoid region again. That's where you're going to find the DNA, and essentially here, it doesn't have a nucleus, remember? So that's the region you find your DNA. You're going to see the ribosomes here that are important in synthesizing proteins. You get the, inside that, you have the cytoplasm, right? Everything, the cytosol, plus all the other stuff that's in there, like the ribosomes and everything else. You can see here, in that yellow line that's there, that's where you have the plasma membrane. That helps to enclose all the cytoplasm. Right on the outside of that is the cell wall. That helps kind of protect it, right? That is going to be the thing that makes it really rigid. And the orange on the very outside of that is going to be the capsule, and that's sticky. Now, it's made of what's known as glycocalyx. And this is a sugar, it's a carbohydrate. And it kind of feels the same that if you've ever touched the outside of a fish, that coating on the fish, essentially that is equivalent to what the glycocalyx is. So it's like a slime layer. And then essentially in the outside, you see those kind of hair-like appendages. Those are pili, and those things are going to help attach. And then in the very back are the flagella that help with locomotion. Now, oops.
Hi, I'm Emerald Robinson, and in this What Is video, we're going to take a look at one of nature's smallest yet most influential organisms, bacteria. Bacteria, sometimes called prokaryotes, are microscopic single-celled organisms that lack a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Most bacteria have the same major parts, a protective cell wall, a cell membrane, and a strand of DNA. Many bacteria also have flagella, whip-like structures that help them move. And all bacteria reproduce by binary fission. They grow until they split into two new identical cells. Bacteria are very diverse. They have adapted to live in every type of environment on Earth, including areas of high heat, extreme cold, high acid or high salt content. They're round, rod, or spiral shaped. Some are easily wiped out by medicines, while some resist them. Of the three large groups or domains that biologists use to classify living organisms, bacteria make up two of them, Archaeobacteria and Eubacteria. Archae, or ancient bacteria, have unique genes that enable them to get energy from unusual sources, such as ammonia, methane, and hydrogen gas. Most bacteria, however, fall into the Eubacteria domain. While some bacteria can make you sick, most serve extremely important functions. For example, bacteria that live in your intestine help you digest food. Special bacteria called cyanobacteria make huge amounts of oxygen through photosynthesis for us to breathe. Humans even use bacteria for everyday purposes. Bacteria help us make foods like yogurt and cheese, and some bacteria even play a crucial role in producing medicine. If you're still not convinced that bacteria are important, consider this. 90% of the cells that make up your body are actually bacteria cells. They're an essential part of what make you, you.
For thousands of how-to and advice videos on any topic, visit.
So guys, with that, I'm going to leave you to think and a little bit about bacteria. And then essentially we'll start the last video of this series talking about eukaryotic cells and the plasma membrane and the endomembrane system. See you soon.